forward to talking with everyone today.
And if you drive, you can see the pictures and experience potholes and crumbling bridges and know what that's about. But we also want to help educate policymakers about the fact that Michigan has a local bus funding crisis. This problem is really holding back our communities and our state. So what does a bus funding crisis look like? This is the experience of many Michiganders that rely upon public transportation, not to mention those who maybe cannot rely upon our transportation system that isn't meeting their needs. This looks like reduced service days, such as only rides on weekdays or limited hours, making it hard for off-shift workers to use. This looks like decreased service frequency, such as a bus that only comes every 30 to 45 minutes, or one that you might need to reserve a week in advance, which isn't of much use to many people. This looks like poor reliability. When buses are under maintenance or there's a lack of drivers, the buses might not show up on time or at all. People are late to work or to their appointments, and they might avoid going places. This looks like reduced service routes, not serving certain areas of population or destinations like employers or retail, etc. This looks like prioritized rides, where people might get a ride to their dialysis appointment or the doctor, but maybe not to go to the store or to visit family or even to go to work. There's been numerous assessments that have shown the need for Michigan to catch up to many of our competitor states when it comes to our public transportation, but there's a big gap between those goals and our current reality, and that gap is growing bigger all the time. Right now, I want to thank Representative Jason Morgan for joining us today to offer a few words. As many of you know, despite only beginning his second term in the legislature, Rep. Morgan has been a strong advocate in pushing this issue forward and in working with his colleagues on both sides of the aisle, especially to initiate the Legislative Transit Caucus. Many of you also know that Rep. Morgan is a proud NMU Wildcat, and I think he's on his way up to the UP today, so we appreciate him joining us and want to let him say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And I appreciate everybody being on today. This is such an important conversation. I appreciate particularly a number of my fellow reps who are on here and staff as well, because it's really important for folks to understand how public transit works here in our state, what the needs are, and to make sure that that is tied into any conversation about comprehensive transportation funding as we look to this next couple of months here through that discussion. So for me, there are a couple of things. One, transportation, public transit in particular, impacts every part of the state, from Ann Arbor, where I live today, to Marquette, where I'm heading at the moment, to the thumb of Michigan, Grand Rapids, Metro Detroit, Bay City, Saginaw. Every part of the state is impacted and supported by public transportation, particularly the local bus operating fund that supports all these agencies. That is one of the number one things that we have to protect. And frankly, we should be investing more in a lot of other areas in addition to fully funding local bus operating. We should be funding capital for our buses. We should be funding an increased percentage of a match from the state for local bus operating. And we should be funding transportation in a way that is a long-term comprehensive significant investment in rail and expanded routes and expanded infrastructure and a lot of these things. So that is where I'm at on this. I've been passionate about public transit for a long time, and not just because I would love to never have to drive my car anywhere again, but because it really impacts so many people who truly need it. Seniors, young people, folks who can't afford to have a car to get to work or to access services or just to see friends and family. I mean, it's so important. I also want to thank Rep. Mike McFall, who's on here, who helped co-found the Public Transit Caucus with me. He's been a great partner in this as we pushed the last couple of years to really elevate the conversation around public transit. And I hope that you've all seen that. I'm probably annoying to some folks at this point about how hard I've been pushing on public transit and how frequently some of us have been talking about it. But we've got to do it. We've got to make sure that it's fully in the conversation as we look to fund our long underfunded local roads and state roads and make sure that we're investing in a long-term plan. It has to include transit as a component of that. So I will maybe leave it there, other than just to say that we've got our work cut out for us. I think there's a lot of support in the legislature to support public transit. I think there's a real conversation that's going to happen around long-term transportation funding and it's up to us to make sure that public transit is included in that dialogue. And here's the added benefit for me. I'm a really big fan of funding local roads and state roads and public transit. So I'm going to be pushing on all fronts and make sure we have the resources to do these things, and partnering with Megan and John and all of our amazing public transit advocates that we have here throughout our state. So great to be with you. I will be listening in, and appreciate everyone and the work that you're all doing.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Your work, your leadership, and look forward to bringing this topic, this education, to so many people today and beyond. And safe travels. So I want to just give an overview of what we plan to cover today. We want to just look at what the role of Michigan's local bus systems are. As a rep mentioned, that is different from different parts of the state. And we have two directors from West Michigan and from the Northern Lower Peninsula to share about what rural transit looks like in their communities. We do want to give an overview of how public transportation is funded, including the relationship with road funding. We want to talk why local bus systems are nearing a funding crisis, what's actually been happening in the funding situation, and then some potential budget solutions. And along the way, to give you some perspectives of people involved with it. So again, I'm going to turn it over to these folks. We're going to have Carrie Thompson, who's the director of the Cadillac Wexford Transit Authority. Then we're going to have Heidi Wenzel, who's the director of transportation in the city of Ionia, Dial-A-Ride. We're also going to hear from Christy Nelson, who's the director of downtown centers at Delta College and works in coordinating and working to provide transportation services to students at her institution. We're going to actually hear from a driver, Scott Cruz from Clinton Transit, from their Blue Bus system, and he's going to talk about some of the people that ride his system and his buses every day. And then we're going to have Megan, who we've heard from, to go through some of the funding. So next up, Carrie, if you want to share a little bit about your system, and then we'll go in order. Thanks.
Thanks, John. So my name's Carrie Thompson. I'm the Executive Director for Cadillac Wexford Transit Authority and also the VP of Mass Trans, which is a statewide transit organization. Here in Cadillac, we're a small rural transit system. We cover Cadillac and all of Wexford County. We do about 150,000 rides a year with about 60 employees and 36 vehicles. We do that through demand response services. So that means if you need a ride, you call us, we come get you, and we do that same day or up to 21 days in advance. We have non-emergency medical transportation. We also have contract service. So we provide contracts to CMH, Hope Network, Munson Hospital here in our region. We do Head Start rides. We also work with Area Agency on Aging to transport seniors and Wexford County veterans. We have another program that's kind of unique, which is called our New Freedom Volunteer Driver Program, where we take seniors and veterans to specialist appointments all over the state as well. And getting them the care that they need, because a lot of times seniors and veterans just won't go to their appointments, which do not have good health outcomes. So we've really seen a great increase in that. And then we also have transportation to local cancer centers and dialysis on a regular basis. But the thing that surprises people most about our rural system is our number one trip purpose is actually work. So we have a large manufacturing base here in Cadillac, and so we are taking people to their jobs all day long. So that is our number one trip purpose, to provide those essential trips to work. Our demand response system has grown every year. We've actually we've seen we've seen record ridership over the last couple of years. Honestly, the more buses that I can put on the road, I'm filling them pretty fast. So right now we are actually turning down rides. Sometimes we're asking people to book early because we do not have the resources under the current budgets to actually hit demand. You kind of talk about the majority of those rides. So we have people going to work. Like I said, we move seniors. We also transport a lot of school kids. So we have a lot of people moving around Wexford County for school of choice. So every day we are moving about 300 students to different schools for school of choice on demand response. And we also do a lot of after school programs to the YMCA. We're taking about 70 kids from one of our middle schools here in Cadillac over to the YMCA. We have a program with them to take kids to after school tutoring and to keep middle schoolers out of trouble, right? So they're at the YMCA with their friends and supervised. So really our biggest problem right now is we have more demand than we have resources to put on the road. With the decreased funding levels the last few years, that's gotten really hard. We have tried really a lot of different things to squeeze the most efficiency out of our current system, including getting new dispatch software that makes the routing more efficient and also has an app. So that way we don't have to add dispatch staff and some of our passengers can self-serve and get notifications when their bus shows up. So that's been wonderful. We got a grant to do that. And the problem is, though, that we really can't cut ourselves into success. That doesn't make any sense. So we're really at the point where there's not much more efficiency that we can cut out. And we still have a lot of demand that needs to get met in our rural area. So we are definitely concerned about funding levels, and it is starting to, yes, put us in a crisis, and we are definitely not the only transit experiencing that. So that's kind of our story here in Cadillac.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
We'd like to go next to Heidi Wenzel, who's the Director of Transportation with the City of Ionia. And we have some questions in the chat. We'll come back to those. Thank you, everybody.
Good morning. As you said, my name is Heidi Wenzel. I am the director of a small rural public transportation system in Ionia and the current president of the Michigan Public Transit Association. IDART provides service to the city of Ionia and portions of the surrounding townships. Over the last year, we averaged 169 trips per day during the weekdays on our 8 routes within the 10.5 hours of operation that we have. Ionia is categorically an at-risk, lower-income community, so public transit is really an integral part of our community for many individuals. New riders into our transit system often, when they call in, tell us that they saw out moving to our community because we have public transportation. We have a large oasis of public transportation around our community, unfortunately. So there are a lot of other rural communities that don't have the opportunity to have public transportation. Our public transportation provides access to groceries, prescriptions, employment and employment opportunities, school, medical appointments, mental health appointments and programs, socialization, childcare, recreation, and more. Our public transit service allows our growing aging population to age in place and maintain their independence. And it also allows for those with mobility differences the freedom to live independently. And as I mentioned, it provides a greater opportunity to individuals and families living in or at or below the poverty line in our at-risk community. If our service didn't exist, individuals would lose access to nutritious food, needed physical and mental wellness care, necessary medication, employment opportunities, and access to education. Our Rite Aid in downtown residential area of our community was one that recently closed, which means the only access to prescription medication now is out south of town, that is along or out on a busy MDOT highway that has no sidewalk the majority of the way. The dialysis center that a lot of our riders need to go to for their life-sustaining treatment is along that same route on that otherwise inaccessible route. In the opposite direction outside of our downtown area is our community mental health programs that are, again, don't have a lot of sidewalk or accessibility. So transportation is really key to get those individuals to those needed appointments and those resources. People would lose access to the employment they've come to rely on. In the childcare that they need for that employment. Even now, we have riders that will walk to the edge of our service zone to be able to get transportation to their job or to get to grocery stores. We provide transportation to several industrial employers in our area, as well as many retail and food employers, as well as working with Michigan Works to help individuals that are job searching and accessing employment education to increase their employability. The families that use public transportation to get their children to school safely for a multitude of reasons would struggle to find a safe alternative and would not be able to allow their children to be part of those extracurricular activities whether it be sports or the school functions, their tutoring, any of those additional programs that are necessary for them. Non-choice riders would lose their freedom to move and live independently, whether they're unable to drive or can't afford to own and maintain a vehicle, or whether they rely on our service to maintain their independence and access to daily life needs. Transit systems across our great state have the same impact in their communities and the lives of their riders. Funding public transportation not only positively impacts community members, it also positively impacts communities economically by giving many individuals an opportunity to reinvest in their communities through employment and commerce. The majority of our riders that utilize our service to get to work would struggle to maintain their employment without public transportation. They would be unable to get to the grocery store where they reinvest their wages into our community and support a store that employs other public transit riders. In addition, our robust public transportation that connects communities allows individuals to live in affordable areas and still travel to jobs that offer a greater economic opportunity for them. Public transportation is a key to economic success in all of our communities, including Ionia. Everyone I know is feeling the impact of rising costs at an individual level and beyond, but the declining level of funding is looming large over many transits as we try to plan for how to deal with increasing costs and increasing demand for service. Trying to plan out which route to cut or how to provide the same service with fewer drivers is an impossible task. Access to public transportation, especially for non-choice riders, is as important to communities as access to education, physical and mental wellness, and economic and social assistance and services. I really appreciate everyone being on here and taking the time out of their day to be a part of this and really just give us an opportunity to tell you the importance of transportation, not only in our communities, but those across the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. And it's great to hear again from both Heidi and Carrie about what the services they're providing in their community are. So we very much appreciate Christy Nelson from Delta College, and she's going to share a little bit of what that looks like for an educational institution.
Hi, thanks everyone for joining and thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. Delta College has been very thoughtful on making sure that our students have access to education. We do have downtown locations, and that's my role at Delta College as I oversee our downtown locations in Saginaw and Midland. That being said, our downtown locations are really set to help those students that want to transfer on to a university. And much of that is because the limitations of our facilities. We're not able to have the robust labs that we have at the main campus. So public transportation is critical for our students because they may be able to take some of their prereqs for programs like nursing and welding, physical therapy assistance, all these programs that lead to really good paying jobs and are in demand. Like employers need more of people in these fields, but we can't do that at the centers. So we need to be able to get our students to our main campus. Our college specifically serves 3 counties. We are Midland, Bay, and Saginaw counties. And so my job also includes being the transportation liaison for the college. So I work with the Midland Dial-A-Ride, and I work with Bay Metro, and I work with STARS in Saginaw. And most recently, I joined as a board member for STARS to be able to represent the education piece. And from my board role perspective, I have learned, how critical it is that the funding increase for transportation. Without transportation, we really would be in all 3 counties, we would have significant impact on our students and their ability to have access to these programs that can lead to good paying jobs, but also from an employer standpoint, we would be the pipeline for these students to be able to join the workforce. That would hurt our employers as well. So it's really critical, and it's not just based on whether people can afford transportation. One trend that I've seen as the transportation liaison at the college is more and more younger students, so that they're graduating from high school when they're coming to college, don't have driver's licenses. I think the cost of driver's training, those types of things, we're seeing where students get their driver's licenses later. So to be able to make that bridge right after high school to college, that transportation piece is critical. So I see it in Midland County, I see it in Bay County, as well as in Saginaw County. So really from my perspective, it's just important that students have access to education so that they can, pursue careers that are going to lead to living wages and just really impact their employment for future generations even. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. Appreciate all the work you're doing at Delta College and appreciate your joining us today to share a little more about that. Next, we want to ask Scott Cruz, who is a driver with Clinton Transit, and he's one of what we call our frontline employees who's out every day giving rides in the blue buses. And Scott, appreciate you joining. I think you need to turn the mic on if you can, or your camera on, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, my phone is yes. I'm just having it. There we go.
All right. Take it away, Scott.
My name is Scott Cruz. I'm a driver with Clinton Transit. They're long known as the Blue Bus. We are a rural demand response with curb-to-curb service and mobility services. I've been with the transit almost 3 years, and no other organization that I've been a part of has been, truly embodied their mission, their vision, and core values like the Blue Bus. And that starts with our leadership that has a passion for the people of our communities, not just in their words, but by their actions. So our mission is to keep people connected, and I try to bring the people even more, a unity with their community. I want to be the driving force, the I in the word unity. But I can't do it alone because unity starts with you. I need help. So without county, state, and federal funding, public transit would not be affordable to the peoples of Clinton County. Not a day goes by that I don't know what I would do without the Blue Bus. When, of course, I would jokingly respond with, well, you'd be stuck at home, and they would laugh. But public transportation is not their first choice. It's their last choice. And for most of my riders, their only choice left. They have exhausted their family and friends, and also for-profit transportation services are way too expensive. I see my riders every day that are struggling to pay even what we ask from them. So, people might say we just provide a physical service to the public, and we do, but we go beyond that. So at Clinton Transit, if we see other physical needs of our riders, we try to meet those needs. And if we can't, we connect them with those who can. We don't just pick them up from where they're at, like an address. We pick them up from where they are personally, so that when they get to their destination, they are more positive than when they got on the bus. I am more than just a bus driver. I am a listener. I'm a friend, a comedian, a mentor, and a therapist. I have to charge for the bus fare, but the kindness and love is free. Love and kindness is what we need to share with everybody. So please be the you in my unity so I can continue to bring them, my riders, the unity with their community that they deserve. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate, again, you sharing your perspective as one of our frontline drivers that's out there and giving these rides, connecting community. So next we want to have Megan Owens, who is with Transportation Riders United. And Megan is going to share a little bit about transportation funding and how it works in the state of Michigan. And after that, then we'll come back and we'll have questions.
Yes, I certainly can't do a better job of explaining why this issue is so important, but I do want to help make sure everyone understands a little bit about how it operates here in Michigan. I do have slides. Come on. If my computer will connect to them properly. Sorry, just one moment. All right. Excellent. So yes, we're going to talk a little bit about how Michigan funds public transportation. My organization, oops, come on, I'm already skipping ahead. That's what I get for trying to manage the Zoom and present. But yes, my organization is Transportation Riders United. We work primarily in Southeast Michigan. We believe everyone should be able to get where they need to go. So for almost 25 years, we have been educating, advocating, and mobilizing for more and better public transportation options and other sustainable, affordable mobility. We want to make sure that transportation really works for all Michiganders. So you've already heard a lot of why transit's essential. I want to remind everyone that public transit is for everyone, for our elders who want to age in place but still go out, for disabled Michiganders who want to have access and freedom, for families who may only have one vehicle, for every young person saving up for their first car, for people trying to find affordable ways to minimize their climate footprint, for workers whose car happens to be in the shop, for that 15-year-old on the way to their first job, for sports fans who can afford more games if they don't have to pay for parking, for everyone who wants choices in how to get around, and anyone looking to avoid outrageous gas prices and insurance costs, especially our essential workers. This adds to some half of Michiganders who want and need more options for how to get around. Public transit is also everywhere. There are 77 agencies serving every single county in Michigan. Some names you may know, others may run under the radar, but they are lifelines for their communities. And public transit does relate to just about everything. So whether it's access to opportunities that Michigan provides, whether it's enabling options, whether it's just making our state a more affordable, safe, attractive place to live, work, and invest, transit touches so many of the things we care about. So yes, how is transit funded here in Michigan? Every transit agency has a somewhat different mix of funding, but all look to local and state and federal funding to operate. That trifecta of funding is really critical. The largest share tends to be from local funds, most of which are voter-approved property taxes. And I will note, this is one of the only government expenditures that voters have to affirmatively approve every few years. And here in Michigan, voters support 90% of transit millage questions. Local funding also includes bus fares, contracts, ads, other local revenue. Certainly state support, which we'll focus a lot more on in a moment, and then federal support, which provides some very important federal rural operating funds, and for all agencies provides a critical part of buying buses and other capital needs. And when any one source decreases, agencies are stuck either having to figure out how to cut service or to raise funds, which they can't always do, certainly not quickly. So, as you may know, funding for Michigan transportation has generally come from the gas tax, the diesel tax, vehicle registration fees, and those go into what's called the Michigan Transportation Fund, the MTF. I got a couple of acronyms I want to make sure that you probably know, but I want to make sure everyone knows the MTF. And where that goes, 90% of that explicitly goes to local, county, and state roads, and there are formulas for which, but the vast majority of that constitutionally goes to the roads. Another section of that goes to the CTF, the Comprehensive Transportation Fund. Now that comes after some earmarks to debt service, other state departments. So up to 10% of the MTF goes into the CTF, and that's after some administrative costs. The other really important acronym we'll talk a lot about is the LBO, Local Bus Operating. Those are the funds that enable all of the work that you've heard about so far today. As well as there's a line for transit capital, buying and improving vehicles, for rail and intercity bus connecting between our communities, and for a range of ferry boats and other specialized services and planning. So all of those different non-road funds all come from the CTF. And that's traditionally, oh, and there's another source, the auto-related sales tax. Up to 25% of that can go to the CTF. It's actually been less than 7%. But that's where all the CTF comes from, is a portion of the MTF and a portion of the auto-related sales tax. That's how it's traditionally been funded. And for many, many, many years, transportation funding in Michigan was very flat, and it was a real challenge, not even keeping pace with needs or inflation. Your colleagues in 2015 passed a transportation funding measure, how it focused almost entirely on roads and neglected most of the rest of the transportation system. And so transit funding has remained largely flat. I urge you to please keep this in mind when you're looking at transportation funding moving forward. Because since 2017, when that measure was implemented, some funds were earmarked directly to roads, cutting out all of these transit funding options. And some state general funds were allocated directly to the roads. So the CTF is getting less than 8% of the MTF. So again, slightly complicated, but hopefully that gives you a general sense of where these transportation dollars go. And because of that gap, because not all of the MTF, 10% of that MTF is going to the CTF, by skipping that in the past funding deals, transit has lost millions. The full bars show what the CTF would have received if it had gotten the full 10%. And it could have seen some real increases over the last decade. But by bypassing transit, the solid red bar is what the CTF has actually gotten. And as you'll see, there's some big gaps in that. So nearly $100 million a year that would have otherwise been invested in transit have not been. And that's been a huge burden on for our agencies to try to figure out how to handle that. I also want to take a few minutes to talk about how Michigan divides transportation funding, because as I said, 77 different transit agencies, 3 different ferry companies. We want to look within that local bus operating line item, which is the most important line for many of the transit agencies. So transit agencies are split into 2 buckets. There's urban agencies, about 20 of the agencies that serve some of the largest cities and metro areas, as well as 50 some non-urban agencies serving both rural and smaller cities and towns. State funding is provided on a reimbursement basis based on eligible expenses, which non-urban can get up to 60% of that reimbursement, and urban up to 50. So every year, the total expenses the expenses are totaled, and a potential reimbursement rate is calculated. But that LBO line item has very rarely covered that full funding. So the amounts that are decided by the legislature and governor have to then be divided out. And we have to calculate out what that actual reimbursement rate is. This year, it's around 35% for those urban, non-urban, and about 30% for the urban. And then they project forward based on what the governor has proposed in her budget. Transit agencies are looking at just 31 and 26%. I guess I won't get into all of this, but the governor did propose an increase for roads, but noted just ongoing support for transit and rail. And ultimately, the transit capital is down a little bit. The local bus operating line would have removes the one-time funding that helped the agencies survive the last few years, and rail funding is down as well. So this is the other important chart I want to share before we wrap, is that what has happened over the course of the last 25 years. At one point, the state covered almost half the costs of running this important transit service, but as pure dollars have been flat or have failed to keep up with expenses, transit agencies are now looking at potentially the lowest funding rate from the state, at least in any of the records that I could find. I mean, if your salary didn't change for years, yet your rent, your groceries, your gas costs were up 5, 10, 50%, 15% every year, how long could you keep trimming before you just can't do it? That is where transit agencies are. A flat LBO actually means a major cut for transit agencies. So lastly, before we move to some questions and discussion, I want to touch briefly on what the transit needs and funding options are. Ultimately, the governor and the legislators will decide where to invest, but we want to spotlight first the importance of restoring full funding to the LBO. When the state was covering around half, then the federal and local only needed to fill in about half. That we really do need another roughly 200 million above current funding to get back to that full funding level. And many of us would believe that our transit service in Michigan is not where it needs to be, and that we do need to also invest in transformational transit, rapid transit in many of our urban areas, or connecting our communities, expanding rail and intercity buses, ensuring that there are connections to airports, to job centers. And that needs at least another 200 to 300 million from the state. That's what the funding need looks like. We are very excited to see that the governor's road funding proposal, the transportation funding deal, does use that traditional formula, would include 10% for transit to make sure all of that revenue gets invested across the whole transportation system. And that would raise approximately $250 million for the CTF based on what we've been able to see so far, which would be a huge step in the right direction. There are also other ways. I know there are a lot of different discussions, whether there are shifting different funding, whether it's restoring the CTF's full 10% back to the MTF or from the MTF, whether that's shifting more of the auto-related sales tax. Representative Morgan was working on a bill that would do that to ensure the constitutional maximum amount of funding is going from the auto-related sales tax. Are there other funding sources, or can we look at new funding? Whether that's a sales tax for transportation, which would need a constitutional amendment, or other surcharges or fees. There's a wide range of ways to fund transit. But in closing, transit is essential for Michiganders. The need is really increasing with our aging population, with rising costs. The need for transportation options is really growing. We have 77 amazing agencies that are providing really critical rides every single day to tens or even hundreds of thousands of Michiganders, but they have long been underfunded, and some are nearing truly the crisis level of having to cut or even eliminate essential services. At one point in time, the state did cover half of those costs, allocating nearly 10% of the gas taxes and the MTF dollars. But the state has not meaningfully increased transit funding in decades and has failed to even keep up with rising costs. So we really need a funding boost of $200 million to restore transit funding, and another 200 million to expand. So we want to move now to questions. I will invite all of our panelists to come on screen if you are comfortable and able, and I will stop the recording.